A cold and lonely winter. It was a cold winter morning in a remote village, lost in the mountains, where the wind cut like knives and the snow covered the entire landscape with a thick white blanket. The sun barely showed through the gray clouds, and the silence was absolute. The people of the village had learned to live in harmony with nature, but the winters were relentless. The village was isolated, with no access to the big cities, and its inhabitants had to take care of each other to survive. In a small wooden house, built near the forest, lived a man named Matteo. He was a solitary man, enjoying the tranquility of rural life. He spent his days chopping firewood, repairing his home, and tending to his small garden, which still endured the intense cold. Matteo didn't need much. He had lost his family years ago in an accident, and since then, he dedicated himself only to his daily routine, not wanting to be bothered by anyone. That morning, like so many others, he woke up early. The warmth of the fireplace was the only thing that kept him comfortable in his home. He was preparing breakfast when, suddenly, something caught his attention. He looked out the window and saw, in the distance, a dark figure. He thought it could be a deer or a bear, animals that occasionally roamed near the forest, but as he looked more closely, he saw that it was not a common creature. They were wolves. Part 2. The wolves appear. The wolves were slowly approaching, crossing the snow-covered clearing. At first, Matteo thought they might be looking for food, but something in their behavior seemed strange. They weren't running or moving wildly as they normally would. They seemed almost like they were dragging themselves, weak, as if the cold were freezing them. One of them, the largest, walked with difficulty, as if its body was covered in frost, and the snow creaked beneath its paws with a sharp sound. Matteo felt a chill as he watched them. The wolves weren't approaching with hostility. In fact, they seemed to be searching for something or someone. But what caught his attention the most was that as they got closer to his house, the wolves began stopping in front of the door, as if they knew someone was inside. Then, the largest wolf stepped forward and, amazingly, opened its mouth. "Please, man, let us in. The cold is killing us." Matteo blinked, incredulous. He was sure he had heard right, but he couldn't believe what his ears were telling him. A wolf talking. Matteo's mind tried to rationalize the situation, but he couldn't find a logical explanation. It was impossible. However, the wolves showed no signs of aggression. On the contrary, it seemed like they truly needed help. Part 3. The decision to help. For a few seconds, Matteo stood paralyzed, not knowing what to do. He could feel fear taking hold of him, but at the same time, something inside told him he had to help them. The wolf seemed to be suffering, and its large, bright eyes reflected a desperation he couldn't ignore. Matteo slowly approached the door, opening it cautiously. The icy snow entered his home, and the air became even colder. The wolf, which seemed to be the leader, looked directly into his eyes. In a softer tone, it spoke again. "We are the guardians of the forest. We've been cursed by an ancient spell, and this endless winter has left us trapped in this ice. Only the warmth of your home can save us." Matteo didn't fully understand what the wolf was saying, but something in its words deeply moved him. The compassion he felt for these seemingly desperate beings grew more and more. Even though he knew he should be cautious, curiosity and the desire to help drove him to act. Part 4. Entering the house without thinking twice, Matteo stepped aside and gestured for the wolves to enter. The leader wolf, though distrustful, seemed to understand that this was their only chance to escape the freezing cold around them. One by one, the wolves entered the house, walking with difficulty, as if their bodies were still affected by the cold. Matteo's home, though modest, had a fireplace burning brightly. As the wolves approached the fire, the frost on their bodies slowly began to melt. The warmth of the fire seemed to bring them back to life, and gradually, their movements became more agile. Matteo's eyes, still full of amazement, couldn't stop watching them. When all the wolves were inside and curled up by the fire, Matteo began to notice something strange. The wolves weren't just recovering their physical strength. They seemed to be changing. It was as if their forms were returning to something beyond what a simple animal could be. The atmosphere in the house grew more mysterious, and Matteo felt that something supernatural was occurring. Part 5. The revelation of the curse. After a few minutes, the leader wolf stood up and walked toward Mateo. Its eyes glowed with an inhuman intensity, but there was no longer any fear in them. It approached and, with a bow, spoke again. "Thank you, man. You have broken the curse that kept us trapped in the ice. We are not simple wolves. We are protectors of the forest. An ancient sorcerer cursed us, leaving us frozen in this eternal winter. Only human warmth could free us." Mateo, though still stunned, began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The wolves weren't ordinary animals. They were magical beings, with a purpose much greater than simply surviving. They were tied to the balance of nature, and their curse was something much deeper than he could have imagined. Part 6. The Promise of Protection. The leader wolf continued. "As thanks for your kindness, we wish to offer you our protection. From this day forward, the forest will be your ally. Any danger that threatens you, we will be there to help. The balance between man and nature must be maintained, and you will be a guardian of that harmony." Mateo didn't know how to respond. He could only feel a mixture of gratitude and awe. He couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened, but something inside him told him that this was a blessing. The wolves, now fully freed from the curse, moved toward the door. "Remember, man, nature has its own guardians. And now, you are one of them," said the leader wolf before turning and walking into the snow. Part 7. The Legacy of the Wolves. The wolves disappeared into the forest, leaving behind only the echo of their steps in the snow and the whisper of the wind. From that day on, Mateo never felt alone again. Though he never saw the wolves again, he felt their presence whenever the snow fell, like a soft whisper between the trees. The man who once lived in complete solitude now knew that his life was deeply connected to the forest and its mysterious guardians. The wolves, now as protective spirits, accompanied him in his daily life, and any danger that threatened the balance of nature, they would be there, ready to intervene. And so, Mateo lived the rest of his days in harmony with the forest, knowing he had been chosen by the wolves to be their ally, their protector, and their friend. Part 8. The growing bond. As the years passed, Mateo began to notice subtle changes in his life. At first, he didn't fully understand the connection he had formed with the wolves, but little by little, these invisible beings became an essential part of his existence. Each winter, when the cold grew more intense and the snow covered everything around him, Mateo felt the presence of the wolves closer than ever. Sometimes, while walking through the nearby forest, he'd feel a whisper in the wind, as if the trees were speaking to him in ancient tongues. Other times, while gathering firewood for his fireplace, he'd find strange tracks in the snow, large and deep, as if enormous wolves had walked there. He never saw the animals, but he felt their protective gaze, like an invisible cloak wrapping around him. And not only that, the animals of the forest also seemed to behave differently. Deer would approach his home without fear, birds sang more sweetly near his window, and even the rains became less intense, as if nature, in some way, had decided to be kinder to him. Mateo didn't know if it was the effect of the magic of the wolves, but he felt at peace. On the darkest days, when the nights fell quickly and the shadows stretched across the village, Mateo was sure he wasn't alone. The wolves, invisible yet present, gave him the certainty that everything was under control. Even in the most difficult moments, like when a fierce storm broke out over the village, he knew nothing bad would happen. Part 9. The Unexpected Challenge. One day, many years after he had found the wolves, something strange happened. During spring, when the flowers began to bloom and the ice began to melt, a strange visitor arrived in the village. A man, with a dark face and eyes as dark as the night, appeared at the entrance of Mateo's house. No one knew who he was, and he had a disturbing air about him. The strange man asked to speak with Mateo alone, and though Mateo was usually reluctant to deal with strangers, something in his gaze made him let him inside. Once inside, the man spoke in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "I know what you've done, Mateo. I've heard about you and the wolves," said the visitor, his tone grave and mysterious. Mateo frowned, confused. "What do you mean? I don't understand," he replied. The stranger moved closer, his gaze fixed on Mateo's eyes, and then whispered, "You've made a pact with beings beyond what a man can comprehend. The wolves are not mere animals. They are guardians, yes, but their power goes beyond anything you can imagine. And I have come to claim what belongs to me. Mateo stood on guard. Something wasn't right, and he didn't know who this man was or what he wanted from him. He felt a dark energy around him, something that contrasted with the warmth of his home and the protection of the wolves. Part 10. The sorcerer's threat. The visitor introduced himself as a sorcerer, an ancient being who had been a rival to the wolves for centuries. He claimed that the curse that had fallen upon them was just a power struggle between him and the guardians of the forest. The sorcerer told Mateo that by breaking the wolves' curse, he had altered a delicate balance between the forces of nature and magic. Now, the sorcerer was willing to regain his dominance over the forests and the animals. I am the true guardian of these lands. The wolves must return to their place. And you? You are just a simple man who has stood in my way, the sorcerer threatened. Mateo, though alarmed, refused to be intimidated. He remembered the words of the wolves, the promise they had made to protect him. The wolves had chosen him to be their ally, and he wasn't going to let a stranger, no matter how powerful, destroy the peace he had built with them. With determination, Mateo replied, I will not let you destroy what the wolves and I have built. They have given me their trust and protection, and I will protect what is right. If you have something to claim, you'll do it the right way. But you won't take anything that is mine or from the forest that protects all its creatures. The sorcerer laughed darkly, but he didn't seem ready to back down. Instead of attacking immediately, he began casting strange spells, creating dark figures in the air. But Mateo, without hesitation, stepped out into the yard and looked at the sky, hoping for the wolves' help. Part 11. The wolves' rescue. Suddenly, the air was filled with a powerful energy. Mateo felt the atmosphere grow denser, more vibrant. He knew the wolves were near. Then, when the sorcerer raised his hand to cast a final spell, something incredible happened. The wolves appeared, not as mere animals, but as ethereal figures, glowing with silver light. They were more majestic and powerful than ever. The leader wolf, with a determined look, stepped forward and, with a roar that resonated through the air, unleashed a wave of pure energy that destroyed the sorcerer's dark spells. The wind rose, as if the very forest was protecting Mateo. The trees whispered, and the snow began to fall heavily, enveloping the sorcerer in an impenetrable layer of ice. The sorcerer, seeing he had lost, tried to retreat, but the wolves surrounded him. Without another word, he vanished in a cloud of shadows, leaving only the echo of his evil. Part 12. Peace restored. After the battle, the wolves approached Mateo. The leader came up to him, its eyes glowing with gratitude. Thank you, friend. You've proven yourself a true guardian, and you've protected not only your home but the balance of nature. From today on, the forest will be stronger than ever. Mateo, with humility, nodded, but he knew that everything he had achieved was not just his own merit. It had been the bond with the wolves, their wisdom, and their power that had allowed him to face the darkness. From that day on, peace returned to the forest. The sorcerer never threatened the village or the wolves again, and Mateo continued to live in harmony with nature, knowing that he would always be protected by the invisible guardians that had chosen him. The wolves remained his friends and allies, but they also reminded him that the true strength of nature does not only lie in magical powers but in the respect, wisdom, and balance with which the world around us is treated. And so, the legend of Mateo and the frozen wolves became a tale passed down through generations, a symbol of bravery, respect, and the power of nature.